I don't know if this is still streaming on YouTube, but for those on YouTube that might be watching us, apologies for the delay. These hybrid events always have technical glitches no matter how much you prepare in advance. It's just quite normal, so apologies for those online. If I could ask those of us that are on the screen to just put our cameras on so that those in the room can see who's online. Helen, Daniel, Luis Gabriel, I'm not sure if we can see you, but we can see your screen. So I'm going to officially start today's session. So it's about 12:55 p.m. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the public defense of the doctoral thesis of Luis Gabriel Cuervo AMORE for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Biomedical Research, Methodology, and Public Health at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. My name is Nasreen Jassani, and I will serve as chair of today's defense. I would like to thank everyone for joining us in person and online for this important academic milestone. Before I begin with introductions, I want to check if the translation is working. So Dr. Cole, could you kindly confirm that at least in the room, everything is as expected?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. So great, on to the introductions then. You have in the main room our candidate, Luis Gabriel, who is our VIP for today and for whom you're all attending this important occasion. On the examination committee, we have Dr. Helen Cole joining us in person in Spain with specialization in urban health, health equity, and community health. From Colombia, we have Dr. Daniel Elias Cuartas Arroyave joining us. He brings expertise in spatial analysis in health, climate change, and epidemiology, and myself, Nasreen Jassani, joining from South Africa with a lens on health system strengthening, health policy, research impact, and knowledge translation. We cannot forget the important people who have accompanied Luis Gabriel in his journey. His supervisors, Ciro Jaramillo Molina, who is an engineer in geomatics, and Eliana Martinez Herrera, who is an expert in urban health, and his tutor, Xavier Bonfil Cosp, who has extensive expertise in systematic reviews and quantitative methods applied to complex epidemiological research. The thesis was reviewed by myself and Dr. Melanie Lau, who has expertise in urban resilience and innovation. I would also like to acknowledge all the technical support staff that are assisting with this multilingual and hybrid defense. So now that you're familiar with the key actors for today, I'd like to share the objectives and some of the procedural ground rules for today. This session consists of a public defense, followed by a closed examination with the examining committee, and then it concludes with the outcome announcement in public again. The defense is being conducted according to UAB's doctoral procedures and regulations, which require a public act of defense and evaluation of the thesis. The defense has been scheduled in compliance with the formal deposit and notification timelines established by the doctoral school. For hybrid participants, may I ask that you keep yourself muted when you're not speaking? And if you have questions during the public question and answer session, you can raise your hand function. And if you wish to ask a question, I will come to you with your hand raised. If audio or connection problems arise, please write it in the chat or notify the technical host via chat, and we'll try and sort you out as soon as possible. So the defense will include more than one language. The primary language of the defense will be English. Committee members and the public may ask questions in Spanish, but responses will be provided in English, with Luis Gabriel doing a quick translation for us to make sure everybody understands the question. Translation will be provided through the Teams software, and you will therefore be able to see this on the screen. For those of you that are online, you can't get translation, but you can go through closed captions if you prefer to be able to read what's being said. You can then choose your language of choice. So may I ask everyone, because this is hybrid and it's multilingual, to speak slowly and clearly when you're using these channels. And of course, if any clarification is needed for fairness, I can pause the proceedings to facilitate that. So I want to ensure that you know what to expect out of the next 2.5 hours that we have together. So here is a quick outline of the agenda. We will begin with the candidate's presentation for 45 minutes. This will be followed by any comment by the supervisors. So Ciro and Helena, if at any point you have something that you would like to add after the presentation, I will call on you. You'd be welcome. After the presentation and any comments from the supervisors, there'll be questions from the committee. This will take 45 minutes. And then we will open it to questions from the public for about 20 minutes. After that, the committee will retreat onto a different Teams link to deliberate in private. And finally, the candidate will be invited back for the outcome. Once the candidate is aware of the outcome, the committee and the candidate will rejoin the public and share the outcome. So now that we have all the protocols in place, I would like to invite Dr. Luis Gabriel Cuervo to the podium to share his research with us. Dr. Luis Gabriel, you have 45 minutes from the start to finish. Dr. Cole and colleagues in the room will ensure that you have a sense of how much time you have left. If you go over time, I will have to intervene to ask you to prepare your final closing. So thank you, and we look forward to hearing about your work in Colombia. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Yesani. Delighted to be here. Good day, and thank you for joining me both live here in Barcelona. Today, I will present the results of my doctoral thesis, which builds on 6 years of collaborative work. This work addresses a simple but critical question. How can we improve equitable health services accessibility in complex urban systems? I want to acknowledge the tribunal, my reviewers, and my tutor, and his team for the support that I've received. And I want to recognize the doctoral program in methodology of biomedical research and public health for its support of policy-relevant research that applies data sciences, people-centered approaches, and intersectoral collaboration. This university is systematically linking its research to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals under the 2030 Agenda. This project contributes to the 4 Sustainable Development Goals that you see on the bottom left, and indirectly to the 3 that are on the right. This dissertation is grounded in the AMORE project. It's a collaborative initiative that I established and led, linking public health, urban planning, and data science. I conceptualized the research question, the methodology, and I lead the research. And I am also the lead author of its publications. The project I lead is a multi-sector collaboration involving diverse knowledge users and interest holders. With that context, let me turn to the problem. Many of us have experienced how travel times in cities are increasing. This is not only an inconvenience, it directly affects accessibility to essential services. Congestion is no longer occasional. It has become a defining feature of urban systems, shaping access to healthcare. But now let's pause for a moment and make this real. Imagine you are with a loved one at a meeting and you suddenly recognize that person is developing the signs of a stroke. You know that every minute matters. There's a stroke center, a certified stroke center, less than 1 kilometer away. So you just put the person in the car and you activate Italy and start driving. And then you hit traffic. You are so close and yet not reaching care in time. And those minutes lost in congestion are not just delays. They can mean lost brain function, long-term disability, or worse. Accessibility is the ability to reach a specific destination that you're looking for on time. We are going to focus here on accessibility to healthcare. So you have an origin, which in this case we put as the place of residence. You have a destination, the health service, and between them, there's a friction. And traditionally, that friction has been measured as if travel times were fixed or constant. For example, the straight line between the origin and the destination drawn on a map, or the travel distance, or the average time of travel for the entire day during a week. So those have been the traditional measurements, even reporting by patients of how long it took them to get to the destination. But in health, what matters is not movement itself, but whether people can reach care in time. And in this project, friction refers to travel times that people experience when seeking services. So when we fail to account for traffic congestion, and especially its unequal impact that it might have on populations, we have a measurement problem. We have a measurement problem because there's a mismatch between the data that we use and people's lived experience. This is the analytical challenge addressed in this work, developing practical, congestion-sensitive metrics that better reflect the reality that people face when accessing health services. At the same time, if we fail to incorporate an equity perspective, we create a policy problem, because fairness and social justice are core to public policy and to health systems. So this is not only a technical issue, it is both a measurement problem and a policy problem. So the question becomes, how can we measure accessibility dynamically and with an explicit equity perspective? This map to the right suggests, for example, that in Cali, Colombia, travel times to emergency services are short, but it ignores both the population and congestion. And this is how it has been traditionally measured. This is misleading. This is how it was being done with the tools that were available until a short time ago. But now, with new data, this can be improved. So we have framed that problem that I just explained and the opportunities that we have in front of us in an editorial that was published in 2022 in Gaceta Sanitaria. And we mentioned those two key challenges. But as we started getting more and more information by interviewing key informants and people that joined the project, and by looking at the literature, the individual studies and the systematic reviews, we realized there were other problems with the existing research. For example, mobility experts indicated that studies were cumbersome, so cumbersome that they're repeated just every 5 to 10 years in cities. They're extremely expensive and they take a long time to deliver results. And they focus mostly on mobility, not specifically on reaching health services, but on moving people. So they wouldn't really address the question that we're having. Civil servants revealed that sectors work in silos, and they use their own metrics, they have their own agendas, so they were not focused on people's needs. They were focused on addressing the issues raised by each of the sectors and their metrics. The knowledge users described the studies were quite cryptic. They were flickered. They were focusing on the perspectives of very specialized teams. Most of the research done by geographers, by engineers, by demographers, and they're very difficult to interpret by educating people who are not specialists. Studies were done excluding parties and disciplines that shape the intersection of urban and health services planning, and they showed fixed results and parameters, and that restricted the ability of decision makers from exploring different scenarios, thus making them of little value for policy making. The inputs from knowledge users were not considered, so overall, they were not decision friendly, and they fell short on equity. But this can change, and this is changing with the availability of new tools, with open data, with big travel time being travel time being data, and with the implementation research we now have tools to build dynamic, equity-informed, and policy-relevant metrics. So what is the policy problem? The policy problem is how to organize cities so that essential services are more accessible to the population that need them the most. And this is for the contribution of these slides. Doing that requires a coordinated, intersectoral, and multi-stakeholder action. So our research objectives were presented in a protocol that was published in the 1000 Research in 2022. And I would group them for this presentation in three main pillars: better measurement, an explicit equity analysis, and actionable evidence for policy and planning. So the dissertation has three main contributions: methodological, analytical, and translation. We structured this work through a simple theory of change, which was published with the protocol. It showed the problem, it showed the constituencies with which it engages, the knowledge that is generated, that action that can be taken, and the impact it could have. In a synthesis, we think that better engagement and better data contribute to better decisions. What is original in this work? Well, it makes a people-centered shift. We have shared objectives through the communication by using unified metrics that bridge domains, and we test them in real systems. So to the left of the image, what you have is the status quo. This is how it's being done. Each sector has its metrics, it has its objectives, its policies, and then things join at the end in the land use, where decisions are made about how urban and health services systems are organized in the city. So you can see that we have them like separated. That's the traditional approach. Here, the three key innovations are at the core, and it's having a single policy-oriented analytical framework. First, we make a people-centered shift, which contrasts with that. It's the one that you see to the right, that focuses on knowledge users and their needs, and leaders, voters. So it focuses on what people actually experience, not in isolated operation indicators, but from transport or health systems or urban planning, but on what people experience trying to reach those services. So we move from a system or the systems thinking about themselves to systems responding to people's needs. These metrics that we use to bridge domains, like transport, health, and urban planning, they enable coordinated action and translate data into policy-relevant decisions. And we know that because they were developed with all of the key actors and stakeholders involved in the process. So this is not just analysis, it's a framework for action. And we tested it. We tested the approach in Cali, Colombia. Cali is a large city, it's an unequal city, and it's relevant to studying accessibility and equity. This is the largest city in Colombia's Pacific region and the third largest in the country. Its urban area has approximately 2.26 million inhabitants, and they are distributed in 22 administrative communes. The population is concentrated, as you can see on the map. The darker the color, the higher the population concentration. So you can notice that population is mostly located on the periphery of the city, towards the city's east, where you have the Cauca River, or to the city's west, where you have the slopes of the Occidental Mountain Range of Colombia. And it has had historic migration and unplanned settlements. So populations are in places that they were not initially expected to be. And inequities in Cali have been important. During the COVID-19 pandemic, they were exacerbated, and they led to a very important social unrest in 2021. In this study, we also examined replicability by measuring accessibility at 2 points. For a week at the beginning of July of 2020, and for a week at the end of November of 2020. And thereby we captured variability in traffic conditions during the COVID-19 pandemic when traffic restrictions were quickly implemented, as it happened in November. We had the far less traffic. We then selected 3 tracer services, each representing a different dimension of accessibility. First, tertiary and care emergency services are usually a final destination for serious emergencies. And there's 14 of those services in Cali, and you see them on the map to the left. On the next map, the center one, you can see hemodialysis services. They represent ambulatory care that needs frequent use. Quite frankly, people using hemodialysis need to go to these services 3 to 5 times a week. And that has a burden, that causes a burden on the entire family usually, and the caregivers as well as the patient. It may also cause an economic burden that sometimes sinks families into poverty. So we have 11 services in Cali with 370 hemodialysis chairs. And finally, we went with radiation therapy, for which there's 5 services. It's a similar situation to hemodialysis, and they're used for a long time, not as long as hemodialysis, but there's few services. So that was the third tracing service that we built. So how did we measure this? Well, we developed a web-based interactive platform. And what it does is that it integrates different sources of data. So our first source of data was Colombia's national census. Colombia, like many other countries, now has a digitized census with georeferenced information of 2 types: of the housing, which is disaggregated by socioeconomic stratum of the housing, and for the population, disaggregated by sociodemographic characteristics of the population. Colombia also has, like many other countries, a database with the services that are being offered. So you could look for those specific tracer services in the webs of the Ministry of Health. And that information was all put in this platform following the traffic analysis zones. That is something that we learned from people in mobility. They use traffic analysis zones and geographic units that allow measuring travel times quite accurately, but using less information. Instead of dealing with 15,000 blocks in a city, you're dealing with 507 in the case of Cali, tracer analysis zones. And for precision, we used the population weight centroid for each one. So we have those layers, and the other layer that we added was the travel times, which we downloaded from the Google Distance Matrix API. You can use many other sources like Waze or TomTom. We use Google Distance Matrix API. And putting them all together, we were able to have that data, the big data, the usable metrics, which we obtained in the interactive platform. And that allowed us to provide simple visualizations and cartography, which we developed with inputs from the knowledge users, so that we knew that all of them could understand them, communicate them, and apply them properly. With that, we ended up with 2 types of measurements: dynamic accessibility measurements with an equity perspective for each of the services, and with the possibility of having model improvements if services were strategically added at those locations that maximize accessibility. And we tried that with our ambulatory services. The way we did this was very important for the project. So we started identifying the sectors and the fields of knowledge and the areas of work where we would have key knowledge users and interest holders. So you can see them to your left, and we identified people, we interviewed these people, and we started learning about the challenges that we would have when they needed information about accessibility, how they would interpret the colors on a map, getting all the insights from them on what were the key issues, how people moved to access those services. That's how we learned that in Cali, like many other cities in Colombia, the preferred mode of transportation for those services is by car, whether private or for hire, for example. And the way of engaging was typically that we would share with them a 4-minute animation that's in our packet. you can access it, available in English and Spanish, but we shared the idea of what we wanted to achieve. And we also had an infographic. And quite quickly, people came back to us and said, I want to learn more about this. So we started having conversations with them on the teams. And that way, we started kind of snowboarding and creating let's say, a critical knowledge about the topic. So we followed those kind of iterations to come back and ask questions and get more information. Sometimes we would get references that were useful as well. So we built a collection in which also the different contributors had it. And with that, we started to put together the platform. Once we had a platform, we started validating the results, taking these two different events where experts from all those different fields were discussing the issues, and we presented it there. And eventually, after presentations in the Americas and in Europe, we ended up publishing our 3 core publications that constitute the body of these thesis by publications. So just to give you an idea, this is how our Soltero collaborative collection was built. We have over 2,500 references, 35 systematic reviews, and that gave us an important insight. We did not find other studies looking integrally at the problem across the board. They were looking at whether they used equity, they were looking at whether the knowledge users were being involved, very few of them, but they were not looking at the problem from end to end. This is a screenshot of our co-authors. So we have 25 co-authors. They all contributed as well, looking into design issues, into interpretation, into the dissemination, and they all represent all the fields that are to your right are represented, and the same happened with the other contributors who were not co-authors, but they also signed the declarations of interest, and they all signed all the papers, and they represent all those fields. So accessibility sits at the intersection of multiple systems, and this collaboration reflects the complexity, bringing together expertise that is rarely integrated in traditional analysis. And this was essential to ensure that the results are both technically robust and policy relevant. Now let me show you the results. So the dissertation is structured as a compendium of publications, each addressing a different dimension of accessibility. The compendium core comprises 3 articles published in high-impact journals that address a common question: how traffic congestion shapes equitable accessibility to essential health services using dynamic travel time data as a proof of concept applied in Cali, Colombia. The first paper was published in 2022 and focused on tertiary care emergency services. The second paper was published by mid-2024 and focuses on immodality services and optimization techniques to locate services in a way that more people are covered. And this was the editor's pick for that issue. And the third one focuses on accessibility to radiotherapy services. And together, these articles move from measurement to optimization with the one on immodalities and translational relevance. Notably, the second and the third papers were recognized as editor's choice, highlighting their relevance to the field. I will now present the main findings of the descriptive and predictive analysis. I'll begin with the descriptive results because a clear description of the problem is necessary before action can be justified. So this slide shows that the spatial distribution of population by socioeconomic housing stratifying, which applies to the 3 reports. So first, what you'll see is that the lower income population lives mostly to the east of the city and to the city's west, and it comprises half of the population of Cali approximately. Then if you look to the map on the right, you notice that the higher income population is a small proportion of Cali's population. It's under 10% of the population, and they're located on a south-north corridor along the city. And then you can see that the middle income housing is mostly located sandwiched between the high income and the low income. both on the west and on the east. Therefore, you can confirm that Cali is a very segregated city. This visualization adds a couple of elements. It has two new dimensions. Now the height of the columns in the 3D represent the population density that we had with colors before. And the colors that you see are the red color represents the lowest income population, the brightest red. The brightest blue, the highest income population. You can see where the services are located. So at a glance, you find that the services are far from where most of the population is. They are mostly located in areas that have low population density and wealthy areas. These are screenshots from the AMORE platform that was the interactive platform we used for the project. On the left, you show the results for accessibility to tertiary care emergency services. The stream left is July measurements. What you can see here is that the lowest income group, which is number 1 here, I'm showing it with a pointer, they fare far worse than the rest of the population. Actually, 1 and 2, the two lower income groups, do poorly. So although just about 1/3 of the population can make it to a tertiary care emergency service in 15 minutes by car, which is how we measure this, these groups do far worse. And in November, the next one to the right, the traffic eased because of the traffic restrictions. Things improved a bit, but you can still see those inequities reflected there. So you can see that things improved quite a bit. It almost doubled in terms of accessibility, but this population here still fares worse. Now, if you look at the two graphs to your right, the one at the bottom shows accessibility by socioeconomic stratum with free flow traffic. That means between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And the blue line and the orange line are the two lowest income groups. They fare worse than everybody else. And you can see that even with free flow traffic, their accessibility to emergency services is reduced. When traffic builds up and you get to peak traffic congestion, those inequities are amplified. In conclusion, congestion amplifies inequities. And now let's look at it on a map. And this time, the color represents something different. In bright red, you can see the longest travel times. And in green, you can see the shortest travel times. So these colors we picked up initially with designers, and then we looked at them with the knowledge users. They chose those colors. But you can see is that the dense areas have longer travel times. The peripheral zones are consistently worse. That constitutes what we call the inverse curve, where the people that need public services the most have to invest more to reach them. And accessibility is not an abstract concept. It is a daily burden for people that depend on care. This is Margarita Gomez. She is in community on the periphery of the city, and she has to reach the Morales services 3 times a week. Each trip is about 45 minutes on each way, and she has to walk 4 blocks to reach a place where the taxi can meet her. And this is only part of it. She also has chemotherapy and once a week and frequent medical appointments every week. So she spends the equivalent of a monthly minimum income in Colombia to be able to get to the services. So accessibility is not just about distance. It is about cost. It is about effort and the cumulative burden on patients, families, and caregivers. And this is how the AMORE platform looks like. And you can see on the top left screen, you can change the parameters of the travel times. We use 20 minutes for the ambulatory services, 15 minutes for the emergency services, but that can be changed. You can look at the different levels of traffic congestion. And you can use any of the graphs as filters, so you can pick the groups that you want to choose for the sentence, and then it shows you the data for the sentence. You can even combine them. Now we have been able to measure accessibility with an equity perspective. And now let's look at the practical planning question. Where should services be located? In simple terms, the model searches interactively for locations to improve accessibility. And those results do not directly translate into policy, but they can help inform policy or land use plans, for example. These are the results for hemodialysis. And what we found was that both in the July and the November measurements, the findings were consistent despite a huge difference in travel times. You can see that to the east of the city, there was a recommendation of placing new services. And if we wanted to place independent services in two sections, it would be the same ones and the ones on the south that, although they look further apart, they're very close by in travel times. The baseline measurement, what we found was accessibility to hemodialysis meant that 45% of the population was within the 20-minute catchment area. That's the baseline. That was the situation in July, for example. And you can see how badly the people from the lowest income housing fare here. What happens if we place services in the area that optimizes accessibility? That is, the one area that optimizes it the most is here to the east. So look at the huge difference in terms of equity that you can see here. It has improved a lot. Now 72% of the population, 71% of the population, 500,000 people more can reach those services within 20 minutes. So you improved accessibility at the expense of reaching the people that need it the most. And if you were able to do that for two services, you would bring it up to 75%, meaning 700,000 more people would be able to be in the catchment area. This just applying prevalence and incidence of hemodialysis in Cali. Without its services in the city's east, you would catch 260 more patients within that area and 70 new patients as well. Now let's look at radiotherapy. Less than a third of the population is within the 20-minute catchment area. You can see here. About 1 in 10 from those in the lower income housing or the underrepresented groups can reach those services within 20 minutes. Again, spatial distribution and traffic congestion are more detrimental to those in the lower income housing. Yet, the strategic placement doubles accessibility, reaching 700,000 more people. The gains are substantial, and again, they are at the expense of benefiting the people that needed it the most. Improvements are not only large, they are equitable. There's increased coverage and reduced inequalities. So this shows structure, not randomness. And just for comparison, look at how this has leveled the socioeconomic stratum or by ethnicity compared to the figure we had at the beginning that I'm projecting it at the center. You can see it's a massive difference in terms of equity. So we have been able to see that you can measure accessibility dynamically and with an equity perspective. You have also seen that we can change accessibility and improve equity that we support. So, for example, service location decisions. By having this conversation with the land use plans and with the urban and health services planners all together and look at that information to inform their decisions. We could look at transport and access policies. For example, in Cali, people receive a subsidy if they ask for it to pay for transportation to the services. That subsidy is the same for everyone. Doesn't matter if you live next door to the service in a wealthy area, or if you live in the peripheral parts of the city and have to travel 45 minutes, it's the same subsidy. You could use this kind of data to provide a fair distribution of those subsidies. Or making sure that people can access the service with the shortest travel time as their preferred service, or that we have integrated pathways. What do I mean with that? Well, people that go to hemodialysis quite frequently need nutrition services. So we should have we should make sure, or the service providers should make sure that they have nutrition services within a close connection of the modality services. And also the city would pick which services to use for monitoring. Can this be used in real life? Well, it's already been used in planning discussions. Cali's development plan, which is being implemented and was approved, cites these results, and it's part of the knowledge database supporting the land use plan currently under development. So this shows that this is not only actionable, it's not only theoretical, that it's actionable. And the other consideration is if a method is too expensive or too demanding, it is unlikely to be adopted routinely. We're able to do all this work without any external funding. The cost of implementation was low, and we can say that it could support monitoring. We're able to make multiple measurements in that time without additional funding. And I believe it's a cost-efficient method because a lot of the people involved in shaping the city and the health service and so on were involved in the process. So you have them participating, but we also had exercises where results were returned to society. This is from the Universidad Valle, an exercise in which results were shared with civil society through an activity organized by the university. So the thing is that this method suggests a plausible pathway towards institutionalization of this process. The method is analytically robust, valid, and it's operationally relevant. It's feasible, scalable, at low cost. So now let me acknowledge the limitations. The limitations are important, not just to interpret the findings appropriately, but also to think about what's the next phase of development. There's 4 basic groups of limitations. For example, the models show accessibility, but not realized use service. So we're not looking at the specific demand of each of the services. And we had limited representation of preferences, fragmentation, and care pathways. We're not looking at all the services, we're looking at those specific services. And we don't know if people would go to the service with a short travel time or if they have a different preference. The data that we used depends on what's available. So we share the limitations that the census might have. The evolving boundaries of the census and the traffic analysis zones, they match very well, but they have evolving boundaries. We have no control on that. And the travel times especially lack transparency. You can download the data. You know that when you use Waze, it's quite accurate. But when you use Google Maps to get somewhere, it's quite accurate, but you don't know how those calculations are made. In terms of policy scope, we didn't do an economic analysis. There's no economic evaluation behind this. There's room to do that. That could be the future. And we didn't look at all the full policy alternatives. The land use and the infrastructure constraints were not modeled. And part of what happens in Cali is that there's restrictions in the land use to place services in the areas where they're most needed. And finally, in terms of implementation, it relies a lot on the institutions involved. It relies a lot on the dynamics that the teams build. So that replicability for that sustained intersectoral collaboration is not something that you can put on a formula. It requires the development of those dynamics. So in closing, this work contributes across measurement, equity analysis, and policy translation. We said we wanted to measure accessibility with an equity perspective, and we have delivered dynamically accessibility measurements with an equity perspective, as you can see on the right with the map that's changing traffic outside. We also aimed to make it action and to show the impact on equity. And we can see from this example from radiotherapy in the July to the left and the November to the right measurements that yes, you can change equity and quite dramatically. As a matter of fact, if you look at the map to the bottom right, the traffic in November, you could also talk about having kind of universal health coverage in terms of accessibility if new services were added in those sectors. So it is actionable, and we can conclude that congestion shapes inequity. And the other thing that happened, and this happened quite naturally with the people participating in the project, is that it gives a vision. We were aiming, and this was the language that we heard, to paint the city green, because that's a simple way of communicating the metrics that everybody would understand. With the city's green, everybody's able to access those services within time. So it captures the aspiration that essential services become more equitable across the city, and that was a visual shorthand that was frequently used. In conclusion, ultimately, this work shows that accessibility is not only measurable, it is actionable, it is also a social determinant of health, and that cities can move towards more equitable systems. With that, I am glad that you have joined, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Luis Gabriel, for this very multimodal and enlightening presentation. I'm sure the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. Before we go to questions from the committee, I was wondering if there's anything that your supervisors would like to add here. I am happy to give the mic to Professor Ciro and then Professor Eliana, if they have anything that they would like to add. I think we have Ciro online and Eliana in the audience.
Hola, muy buenos días en Colombia, muy buenas tardes en España. Voy a permitirme hacer unos comentarios muy breves con relación al trabajo de Luis Gabriel. Agradezco al tribunal que nos permita pues, hacer esta contribución antes de sus intervenciones. Pues Luis Gabriel, yo considero que tu trabajo aporta con claridad y rigor un tema central como la accesibilidad geográfica y la congestión y su manera de incidir en la equidad en salud, que es uno de los elementos fundamentales que me llamó a participar en este proyecto. Logras integrar enfoques que suelen usualmente tratarse de forma aislada y ofrecen una lectura consistente entre lo que es el territorio, la movilidad y los servicios de salud de manera integral. Para el caso de Cali, la evidencia que tú has presentado es muy sólida, no solamente que también es muy útil para tomar y orientar decisiones al buscar esa traducción de resultados técnicos para la política pública. Eso le da a tu tesis y tu trabajo pues un valor que trasciende lo académico. Como codirector, destaco tu capacidad para articular métodos rigurosos con una clara sensibilidad social, que es un motor fundamental para tu trabajo, manteniendo siempre un enfoque aplicado, riguroso y pertinente. Por otra parte, aprovecho la oportunidad para agradecer a la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona por su respaldo institucional, a los miembros del tribunal por su lectura cuidadosa, sus observaciones y contribuciones que han hecho obviamente que el nivel académico de este trabajo supere lo planeado inicialmente. Muchísimas gracias, muy amables.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to do a short translation, if necessary, or do you think for the automatic translation work?
Sorry, Luis Gabriel,
Really?
you can go ahead. Yes, you can go ahead and do a quick translation.
Okay. Well, to start with his critics, he points out that the study brings clarity and vigor to a topic where that's usually not looked at in an integrated way, but in an isolated way by the different sectors. He points out that the evidence from his perspective is solid and useful to guide decisions and policies, especially public policy, and it articulates rigorous methods with social sensitivity that he wants to highlight. And so he finds it rigorous and pertinent, and he has acknowledged and thanked the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, the members of the Tribunal, for the support for this type of studies.
Thank you so much. Ciro, I see your hand is up again.
Yes, una inquietud, Luis Gabriel, sugeriría respetuosamente que pudieras de pronto mostrar la dimensión geográfica de lo que ha sido tu trabajo, dónde lo has llevado y sobre todo el impacto que ha tenido en la literatura científica a nivel internacional con tu trabajo. No sé si de pronto pudieras mostrar brevemente para que el tribunal tuviera esa dimensión y los asistentes en la medida de que sea posible, obviamente. Muchas gracias.
Dr. Jaramillo is asking if we could show where this work has been shared, the different activities that where we shared it and the publications and so on, to give an idea of the process of validation and dissemination of the work.
Perhaps we can do it towards the end so we can just keep to the protocol for today. And it might come up in the questions anyway, but I want to give Professor Eliana also the mic for a minute if she'd like to say anything.
Good afternoon, distinguished members of the Tribunal, Dr. Gesani, Dr. Paul, and Dr. Cuervo, and guests present here in the room, and everyone joined couldn't connect with other persons. I was chatting by our WhatsApp, and people were, where's the connection? So after the recording, we enjoyed with them. Okay, as a co-director of this thesis on Site Zero, it's a true privilege and a deeply moving moment for me to speak today. We have just observed the remarkable culmination of years of rigor, tireless dedication, and an unwavering passion for public health. For us, in fact, to enjoy this moment with you. Today, you have not only presented a brilliant framework of the AMORE project, and I was recommended you maybe public after debate with the conclusions of the Tribunal, and you have delivered a powerful tool for urban social transformation. Your research on traffic congestion, equity, and accessibility to health services has successfully transcended the boundaries of academia databases to have a direct impact on the reality of life. I want to particularly highlight something that is rarely achieved in academia: your ability to foster systematic collaborative learning in a virtual many years finding good. You successfully earned a seat on a table with the city's decision makers, enhancing with them and leaving them genuinely inspired and challenged by the findings. You ensure that those who shape urban and health planning recognize the immense value of your people-centered, data-driven approach. This is the main contribution, maybe I think so. That bridge you have built between methodological science and public policy is, without a doubt, one of your greatest strengths. A key issue, and maybe for the future and other students, is that sectors and disciplines used to tackle problems in silos, isolated by their own metrics and areas of expertise. Here, we have succeeded in working together as a simple, conducting the effort so that everyone's contributions are mutually understood, putting populations at the center instead of the needs of each individual sector. Zero, me, Dr. Bonfield, we are profound proud of you. Thank you, really thank you for your character, your perseverance, your leadership in enhancing the capacities of the great team you assembled, and for reminding us that science truly finds its meaning when it strives to improve people's lives. Congratulations, just, after that,
Thank you so much, Eliana, for your supportive comments at this point in the defense. Clearly, Luis Gabriel couldn't have gotten this far without the support from all his supervisors and collaborators along the way, and we saw that in the presentation. So without further ado, we need to proceed now to the questions and answers session from the committee. We have about 45 minutes for this. And I would like Dr. Daniel to begin the questions. Daniel, please feel free to ask your questions in Spanish. Luis Gabriel will translate and respond in English. Luis Gabriel, I think what Daniel's going to do is ask you 3 questions, allow you to respond. And if there's still time, he'll ask another round of questions. We have dedicated about 15 minutes per set of questions for each committee member so that we are able to complete the 45 minutes in time. I will keep an eye on the time, but at this point, I will hand over to Dr. Daniel to ask his questions. Thank you.
Lo primero, Luis Gabriel, que quisiera hacer es felicitarte, ¿cierto? Felicitarte por este trabajo y el desarrollo de esta metodología. Realmente me parece que aporta mucho para, no solo para Cali, Colombia, sino para pensando en las ciudades latinoamericanas. Y justo en ese sentido, y yo inicialmente tenía 5 preguntas, y luego 3, pero ahorita voy a hacer un gran comentario del cual esperaría tu reacción. Digamos, ahí incluiría una pregunta. Y esto tiene que ver con, hace más o menos unos 16 años, la ONU Habitat planteaba el concepto de ciudades ocultas, o hacía su publicación de ciudades ocultas, en donde perfectamente relacionaba cómo estas ciudades ocultas y la segregación probablemente que encontrábamos en las ciudades estaban configuradas con diferentes eventos en salud. Pero, y de igual manera, nosotros o hace 60 años, Henry Lefebvre planteaba el concepto de derecho a la ciudad. Cuando nosotros pensábamos en el concepto de derecho a la ciudad, y que es un concepto que en Latinoamérica ha adquirido, digamos, una relevancia histórica o una importancia desde toda la conceptualización en el ámbito de la geografía, propone la ciudad como un bien común, ¿cierto? Donde se puede habitar, se puede utilizar, se puede ocupar, se pueda producir y de alguna manera disfrutar de las ciudades. Es decir, la ciudad tiene una función social, ¿cierto? Donde hay una participación de la ciudadanía inclusiva y donde hay acceso a los servicios. Y partiendo un poco de lo que nos presentaste y el documento, pues claramente nosotros vemos que tu trabajo contribuye a esto a evidenciar esto que probablemente se conoce y es la segregación espacial de una ciudad y cómo esa segregación espacial al interior de las ciudades está configurando una manera diferente de acceder a la ciudad, ¿cierto? Y este fenómeno de segregación es un fenómeno típico de Cali, es un fenómeno típico de Colombia, es un fenómeno típico de la ciudad latinoamericana. Pero el asunto, y yo quisiera, y aquí es donde empieza, digamos, la pregunta, y es que esto es un elemento estructural. Y es un elemento estructural de la historia del desarrollo de la ciudad, pero cuando nosotros lo conectamos con servicios en salud, nosotros también lo que estamos viendo y reflejado ahí es cómo se concibe la salud en una sociedad. Y al pensar la salud en la sociedad colombiana, nosotros estamos pensando la salud no como un derecho, sino como un servicio. Y por eso la concentración de servicios en unas zonas específicas que condicionan y favorecen, ¿cierto? Al capital detrás de los servicios de salud y maximiza la ganancia porque justamente el evitar tener que mover servicios de salud y servicios complejos a ciertas zonas de la ciudad donde no puedo concentrar la demanda, pues hace menos rentable la visión de la salud como un servicio y no como un derecho. Y lo que tu trabajo plantea es, mire, mejoremos ese derecho de acceso a la salud, ¿cierto? Porque no es un solo servicio, ¿cierto? Y ahí vale la pena cuestionar los sistemas de salud, porque es lo estructural. Y viendo los mapas que nos presentan, si esto es lo que sucede al interior de la zona urbana de una ciudad como Cali, una ciudad intermedia con 2 millones de habitantes, ¿qué pasa con las zonas rurales? ¿Y qué pasa con las zonas rurales dispersas en un país como Colombia en términos de accesibilidad, donde probablemente los desplazamientos para poder acceder a un servicio no implican ni siquiera 40 minutos, implica horas o días de transporte? Entonces, en ese sentido, Luis Gabriel, quisiera, y digamos, este va a ser mi único comentario por el momento, que intentaras conectar este asunto de la accesibilidad con el asunto de la estructura del sistema de salud para poder, de alguna manera, poner en cuestión cómo es el enfoque del sistema de salud colombiano para poder cambiar la accesibilidad. Porque no es un solo asunto de nuevas localizaciones, sino de cómo los servicios son sostenibles para el sistema.
So, thank you very much, Gabriel. I'll try to summarize what you pointed out, starting with the ONU Habitat statements. Yes, in 2016, actually, UN Habitat and WHO into a discussion where they recommended aligning the urban and health agendas, as you were pointing out, bringing the issue of the hidden cities and the rights that people have to the city, which is a movement that has taken a lot of momentum in Latin America. So, as you pointed out, the project has revealed, it has brought shed light on the whole situation of how the society values health services more as services than as a right to populations. And that those services can be put in the same place. And this was an issue that actually we were very, when we saw those maps, when the information started being revealed, we were puzzled by it. And we thought it was going to be an issue of discrimination, of economic discrimination or racial or whatever, because there were striking differences. One of the interviews that for me was very revealing was to the CEO of one of the main companies in providing hemodialysis services in Cali. And he pointed out that they have actually provided good services in that place. What has happened? That initially those services were all years ago, this was private, but in Colombia now there's a trend to universal healthcare. And most of the services are paid at the same price, no matter where you are. So it's not they don't make more money by putting the services in the wealthy areas. They make more money by putting services where people can reach them. But this is something we've been historically dragging. When we ask him, why does your company not have more services in the cities? He said, we have tried. We really tried. But the land use plan does not allow to put a service in there. So we then said, oh, it's a problem with the land use plan. And we started exploring what was behind it. It turns out, I was mentioning that Cali had a lot of unplanned migrations caused because of natural disasters like an earthquake in the Pacific that led huge amount of population to migrate from the coast to the city, and also by violence, and also by the migration of people, for example, from Venezuela in the past few years. So a lot of people have arrived to the city, and the first thing that happened, they started settling on lots that were not suitable for residency. They were not suitable to be inhabited because they're under the level of the river, separated from the river by a levee. And the city is in the middle of it's an earthquake risk zone. So if there's an earthquake, there's a risk that the levee might give way and the whole zone gets flooded. But it was such a huge number of population that they couldn't really relocate in Cali. and people settled there, and eventually what happens is that they basically normalize the situation with services. And now they have the challenge of providing the services in those areas that are going to cover about 40 to 50% of the population. So I agree that there's been a transition, and that feeling of health as a right is something that has been evolving in our economic population, but there's still some remnants of that perception of we provide these services and that's it. I think that now that the services that there's a shakeup of the whole health system, people are coming to defend more than the whole perception of health as a right of the population. But there is that challenge of how can we reconcile these situations. And what happens with rural areas, yes, you have to have the travel times to build. Actually, I think that it would be ideal that future exercise like this one will be done for metropolitan areas and not just for the urban area of the city. We didn't do it because of a situation of resources, but what we did for Cali could be done for any Colombian city. The data sources are exactly the same. You just change the color of the city for a different one. You can even cover the whole metropolitan area. People that go to AMORE, and this is in Cali, sometimes have been traveling already 2 hours before hitting the city's limit. So that is a reality of these strictly used services in all our cities. But this applies not only to Colombia. In Latin America, 16 countries have this kind of information about where the services are located and where the populations are located that can be disaggregated by sociodemographics and socioeconomic characteristics. And in terms of the travel times, you can find it all over the world. So this can be applied beyond the Americas, yes, in some cities, and there's actually some work going on to do that. But I agree, Daniel, that there's a lot of things that we are carrying with us in terms of the history of the region, of the city, that require a shift to look into these services. And hopefully, looking at those inequities that can be solved, being one of the insights of the catalyst of making people aware that they could have, that this could change. Because the experience that we faced was when we showed those maps, people from Cali, they would immediately go to the place and say, oh, my mom didn't decide that's right. I understand now what that means in terms of inequity. That's something that people understand immediately. Or I live in a green area, so that means that I might be able to reach those services. Have I properly addressed the question, Daniel, or have I missed something?
Okay, Luis Gabriel, muchas gracias, muchas gracias y bueno, le doy paso a Helen. Bueno, serio. Muchas gracias, Luis Gabriel.
Thank you so much,
you,
Luis
Daniel.
Gabriel. Yes, we'll move on to questions from Helen, but if we do have time at the end, we'll come back to a second round of questions if Daniel and Helen and myself have others. So thank you, Daniel, for your questions. I'd like to request Dr. Helen Cole to come forward with any questions that she has for the candidate. Over to you, Helen. And thank you that we can see you, Luis Gabriel.
Thank you very much, and first of all, congratulations. So congratulations. It was such a substantial work that you put forward as a thesis that in many ways goes beyond what is expected or what many doctoral students are in a position to be able to do. And it was a pleasure to read because it also, I think your enthusiasm and your effort really comes through in the way you presented the 3 papers. I wanted to ask a couple of things. One that Danielle was referring to also, which is that in the papers and in the thesis as a whole, you don't give us any background about how the healthcare system in Colombia is structured. Who are the players? Are there who are the owners of the services? How do people receive care and pay for it? And those questions I think are very important because they vary very much depending on the country, and the implementation of the interventions that you conclude would be necessary are very much dependent on how that works. So that's one question. It's just to describe a bit the background for those of us not in Colombia of how the system works there. And then similarly, you mention often in the thesis about the inclusion and the integration of these different sectors in society in the project. And so those include urban planners, transport planners, et cetera, and in addition to healthcare system representatives. And then in the conclusion, which is that people from disadvantaged backgrounds, briefly, people from disadvantaged backgrounds are more affected by traffic congestion in the time it takes them to reach these essential services. And so I can see that one of the solutions to that problem, which is what you suggest in your articles, is to add more service providers in the areas where those people live. But then what about the application of this system to inform interventions on the transport planning side? So I could see that it might be also, and maybe the ideal solution is actually both providing services and also reducing traffic congestion, and that this type of data and linking traffic congestion, health services, and therefore health outcomes could be very important on the transport planning side, because it provides some data that they can use to get support to put resources towards intervening on the side of traffic and transport planning. And then further down the road, I was also seeing like a lot of potential implementation of this service in the realm of health impact assessment methodologies. So that's a method that's often used by urban planners to understand how the interventions that they propose may impact health. And so it seems like this system has a lot of potential there as well. And it's not something that comes up in your article. So those are two questions. And the final question is more introspective, which is that not to point at the elephant in the room, but you're not the typical doctoral student. Not to call you old, but you're someone who has you're in a unique position because you've already lived through a very productive, broad, and amazing career. And so I wanted to ask you to reflect a little bit on the process of doing this dissertation. What specifically did you learn from it, if any, given that you already are this person with so much vast experience and expertise related to this topic? So those are my three questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cole. The way the Colombian health system works, we're close to universal health coverage. And there's a system that has a subsidized part in which government is paying for people who have no way of contributing to the system. And there's a contributive system in which families and the people are covered when they have an income where they can pay for their insurance. And they pay two companies that are called Empresas Prestadoras de Salud, Promotoras de Salud, EPS. So those are the insurer companies. And then you have also the providers of the services, which are the Introducciones Prestadoras de Salud, which offer, for example, hemodialysis, the radiotherapy, and the other services. Most of the population has coverage. And of course, having coverage for some people is considered having the document that allows you to use it. That doesn't mean that you actually have access to each service. But that is a key area that has been at the target of your case, especially because coverage was working very well in cities, but not in isolated areas. And that's where they try to make a review of the health system and the whole thing has been under revision currently for an update on the health system. The thing is having effective access. And one aspect of that we're looking at specifically was whether you could reach those services on time. But in general, Colombia tourism was considered like one of the model services in the Americas and across the world because value for money, accessibility, and the services, quality of the service was quite good. So that's about the economic system. Then we face situations where yes, you can access the system, but you could improve the situation. The situation for caregivers and for families, especially for high-cost diseases that drive them into poverty, is one that we focused on because there's a special insurance to cover high-cost diseases in Colombia as well. So you have the basic coverage, and then there's a focus on supporting those high-cost diseases. What about the interventions on transport that you were bringing up? And I think that's that allows me to focus on a specific point because most of the interventions that are done for accessibility are actually done thinking of the path that people follow. So on transport, the agenda focuses on getting people moved from one place to the other. Those agendas do not focus on health services, and they have not, and that's something we learned through the project. They don't look at the destination, usually at the place of incidence. In terms of the agenda of the mobility sector, it does look into the transportation. They do focus on those kind of issues of how can we get more people into the buses. And through the interviews, we learned something quite interesting. What was someone from the mobility sector pointed out that the interpretation of equity for them was different than the one from. For them, equity means that anybody can get into the bus. Whether you're in a wheelchair or whether you are on one limb, you should be able to get into the bus. Equity for the health service is a different perspective. Being able to get the service that you need on time. So that was a very interesting conversation because in one presentation that I was leading in the team, led by the Subsecretary of Mobility of Cali, she was there with the whole team. We shared the idea, we shared the presentation, and there was silence in the room. So I immediately thought I must have said something very obvious. There's the silence in the room. So I asked him, have I said something very silly or something so obvious that you are all quiet now? He said, no, I never thought about it that way. We have not realized that when we change a traffic light or when we change a turn, that impacts your ability to reach a health service. So that for them was kind of a revelation, and it was because we were having that conversation. And I think that's the richness of this project, where you can bring on the people from the different sectors together. And the other one was having the data scientists all the time with us. So they were not doing contributing to the platform on something isolated. They were understanding the problems, we were understanding it together. So I think those were some of the key elements. And I agree with you that it's not only working on the destination, but because that was the area that nobody was working on, we focused on that aspect with this research. And we have shown that there's a new way looking into it. What I have learned, for me, a key lesson is the communications. Like the biggest investment I put into this work in terms of my personal investment was into the communications. Doing that animation of 4 minutes that took us over 2 months to write a short script that everybody could understand and then animated. It was priceless because then we only needed to send it to people and they would say, I want to know more about this. I want to be part of this. And that's what people engaged. I mean, Juliana, who's here, looked at one of those videos and she wanted to be part of the project and she joined the project that way. It was through reaching out with an animation, with an infographic. So the communications that were simple, that reached everybody, were very difficult to do. I mean, I just couldn't believe how many times we went over each word to find a precise term that everybody could understand And then we would test it first with the family, the friends, and then with other experts, and get it to get that message right. So I think that's a key lesson through the process. And as people got engaged, they were so excited about it, because when we find a common way, we start having in a room engineers and medical doctors and city planners as well, being able to find a common ground. It was fantastic. It was a great experience for everybody. And I think that's what I have learned. I was very fortunate, as you were mentioning, I would say my gray hair, the experience of having worked with policymakers and so on. I think one of the things is that if you put things in terms that they cannot understand them, or they cannot look at different scenarios, they are useless, because they deal with so many other complexities that for us it looks like a simple technical decision, but they have to deal with what laws are available to put in those areas, who's the owner of the terrain, what are the political pressures in those sections of the city. And so creating a tool where they can change and explore, well, if we move it here, what happens? And that kind of flexibility can be provided by the type of tools that we developed. And I was thinking we were going to hit into studies that had a similar integrated approach. We didn't. It was just in 2026, I found a study in which patient advocates were part of the study, were included as co-authors. And it was actually someone that was a caregiver that was leading an organization of caregivers, pointing out how important it was for them to be able to have a voice in these decisions. So this allows, as we saw in Cali, we had all the different interest holders together in the room, that you start finding that ability to, for each one to reach across and come to the common ground. It's up to be the communicating in simple ways, but making it technically complicated, but communicating in simple ways, good enough to make a decision. I hope I have addressed your question, but if I missed something, please let me know.
No, thank you. Good.
Excellent. Thank you so much for responding to those questions as well. It's now my privilege to close the session with a few final questions for you, Luis Gabriel, and I'd like to echo the congratulations that you've already heard on an excellent research project and extremely gripping and very involved across stakeholders. And you mentioned in your very last point about the importance of communication, so I'm going to pick up on that question a little bit. So you've been extremely intentional and successful at going beyond traditional academic outputs. And I think you didn't get the chance to show us that slide that Dr. Ciro asked for, but it goes across all kinds of modalities of communication, both academic and non-academic. Most researchers leave research communication to the end if they even do it at all. But you chose to lead with this. And I think while this is desirable, it's often impossible for many people. So my question for you is, how were you able to overcome the financial and capacity constraints that often hinders researchers from making such an important contribution and impact? And what would your advice be for integrating knowledge translation throughout a project? That's my first question. My second question is more about the terminology and your definitions and how you use them. So in your work, accessibility is operationalized through travel times and cumulative opportunities, predominantly about congestion. And so how do you account for other dimensions of accessibility? You mentioned cost, availability of transport modes, distance, and location of services, but still the focus was on congestion. So how did these other variables feature in the models that you used? And how does that challenge your existing assumptions that others may have about access, equity, and health system planning in low and middle income countries? And then my third question is more about, is policy relevant? So equity is central to your work. But in practice, as we know, a policy constraint in health systems planning is often how do you balance the equity trade-offs with efficiency? So how do you for example, trade-off centralizing these high volume services versus decentralizing for easier access? And how did you navigate this? And how do you continue to navigate this with the policy actors that you're engaged with so that we move from theory and research into implementation? You mentioned in your limitations, we need to go now beyond the thesis into actual implementation. And what do you think that's going to entail? So those are my first three questions. And if we have time, we'll do another round. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jesani. Okay, the first comment you made was about how intentional the communications were, and how we started with that, and how we dealt with the financial constraints of that. So this is, first of all, we made it a priority to deal with the communications from the outset. And we started by working as a team to put together so those key messages and what were the objectives that we wanted to do. But when you talk about the financial constraints and leaving it to the end, this was actually the tool that would enable to engage the different interest holders. If I don't have something compelling, it's very difficult to work with a group. You know, I can build perhaps there an experience that I have as a young researcher, where I engaged in a project that was completely very passionate about it, and that was a corporate collaboration. There was no money involved in being part of the corporate collaboration to do systematic reviews. It was all about doing the right thing that you felt passionately about. And then we started doing systematic reviews, and other people contributed by doing the translations, and some people would contribute by bringing inputs as user services, for example, or as patients. And it was all driven by a compelling idea. And in this case, I think what we did is try to put that compelling idea. When we showed those maps, when we showed the idea, people in every city, we talked to people that were in Denmark and they were interested about it. They can relate to it. Now, most of the studies that focus on equity are done by economists. For example, they would focus on showing those results to the Gini index or to the Lawrence score. But you find it very difficult to relate to people when you tell them that the Gini index improved by going from not 41 to not 39. That is meaningless. But when you show them their city, and then they see that their family lives in an area that's orange, and it could turn green, that is very engaging. That's how we started working in that direction. How did we do this? Well, people that are passionate and people things so passionate. So we ended up having a lot of volunteers people. You see the 50 people listed there. If you look, for example, a museum designer, communications designer. She works in Nottingham for one of the museums. She was passionate about this. So she can work at cost. And we have to use just some savings to make that animation. We had contributions from a lot of people that they did it just because this was the right thing to do. They felt strongly about it. The other thing that we need to deal with the financial constraints, we got a call actually from a big data provider. They wanted to know how we were able to do this study because they know how much that information costs. And so the answer that I gave them was working across disciplines and across sectors. Why? Because we learned how to make this reduce the costs, the demand of the data costs. I'll give you some few examples. Most people would work with the 15,000 blocks they get from the census. We use the traffic analysis zone. How did we learn about it? Working with the mobility people. I learned about traffic analysis zones from zero. So we were able to measure from 507 origins to 15 destinations where also 30 services were located. And in terms of data, that's a fraction of the cost of moving from 15,000 blocks to 30 services. Modeling the clusters that we did with our data scientists for the traffic congestion. So instead of looking at 168 hours that you have in a week, we're looking at 9 clusters that summarize those 168 hours. So that also reduced the sample size. And then, together with the ingenuity of people that have working or not working in countries, Google was offering sample size $1,000 of data for anyone that registered with them in the Google Disadvantage app. And we were a large collaborative group. We came together, each person put his credit card, we downloaded the data that we needed, and we didn't have to make an investment in that. It was using, like if you were mixing pots, small samples of perfume, and we ended up with a big bottle of perfume. That's what we did. And we gathered all the data that we needed to make those two measurements. And we were able to do all this work. Also, I work with a global data scientist of the work team, and we put the platform together. We did things, finding also cost they were, and just about the project. So that I hope addresses a little bit or addresses your question about how we managed to put the communications together and without funding deal with something that would otherwise have cost more than $7 million. That's the cost estimate of that done in a different way. So in terms of the terminology, I think I've covered one part of that with the example of the Gini index, but it was like finding those kind of simple ways of communicating the concept. And I don't know if there is something there in terms of the access, because I kind of I think if I have left out your question on access, Dr. Desani. The final thing I have is equity as being central, and balancing the trade-offs and the economic analysis. There is room to economic analysis. For example, I think this would be a wonderful doctoral study or a wonderful master study for someone in economics to look at what is the cost of out-of-pocket expenditure for families of having to use those services and how much could be improved. In terms of the placement of the services, we're talking about decentralization versus centralization. The services are already centralized in Cali. What we showed here is that by placing in just one additional sector, you could completely shift the situation that you have in Cali and basically solve it by covering two areas. So you don't need to cover with the small centers everywhere. It's just that it's so centralized that only to those city east and the city south to completely transform accessibility, the city painting the map green as we showed in one of the slides. So I think that would balance better the situation for accessibility to those services in the city. That is a discussion that will involve the land use plan. It will involve the urban and health services planning. But there's a lesson that I want to share with you about that. And it was one of the most inspiring conversations I had. It was a video, and the conversation with the person that recorded that video was with a professor from the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona when I was beginning. He's a geographer, and his name is Oriol Neto. And Oriol has a 9-minute video saying how cities are shaped. And cities are not shaped by the policymakers. Cities are shaped by everybody. When you as a citizen start complaining that you have no access to a good park and the rest of the community joins, you are shaping the city. When you're asking for those services to be placed nearby, you are shaping the city. So part of what we're seeking here is to create that momentum of the keyboardists demanding to shape the city to have those services nearby. And we thought there was a very specific opportunity in this moment. That is changing from a city with 22 communes to a special district that will have 6 and 8 zones. And that's an opportunity because all of the services fall in one or two zones. They are divided. You are placing information out there to the local mayors to go and say, well, what about the population? They don't have access to the services. this information is in a way that they can use it to have a deliberative dialogue with policymakers. And that is the idea of promoting that social appropriation of knowledge that this project has. Because one way in which we directly measured it is that the presentations that we gave in many countries were not given by me. I was one of the speakers, but some were given by other people in the project. The recordings of testimonies from Margarita and other ones by Diana Cuervo and by Felipe Figuero and by other people that were part of the project. They took ownership of the project and they have contributed to the translation of knowledge. I hope I have covered these aspects, and I just want to mention there's two master's projects that were done on top. The information that we generated using that same data source that we generated. People did an analysis which they provided the Gini index for those for hemodialysis specifically. That was one, and the other one was done on the usability of the platform for decision makers. So that was Johns Hopkins University master's capstone paper, and the other one was University of Valle epidemiology thesis. I hope I have covered anything, but if I need to complement something, I'll be happy to.
Thank you, Luis Gabriel. I think I've read your thesis multiple times, read your papers and watched all the outputs, and I still feel like I learn something new every time. And so I could go on and on with questions, but we don't have the time for that, obviously. But that goes to show how interesting this project is. So I thank you for your thorough responses. We don't have time for a second round from the committee, but we do have time for questions from the audience. So I'd like to now invite the audience to come forward with any questions. We have about 20 minutes. For those online, please raise your hand and I'll come to you online. For those in the room, please also raise your hand and Dr. Cole will approach you. I think we'll only have time for 2 to 3 questions and enough time for Luis Gabriel to respond. So please make them short and succinct, and then we can make sure that as many of these can be answered as possible. So Dr. Cole, while you're probably scanning the room for hands up, I'll check if there's anybody online. So does anyone online have a question for Luis Gabriel? If you do, kindly raise your hand. And in the meantime, Helen will bring us to anybody in the room.
Question from Javier.
Okay. So I have nobody online at the moment. So I'll hand over to Xavier and Helen, if you can just moderate in the room. Thank you.
And I appreciate the opportunity to make some comments. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate our friend and doctoral candidate for producing a thesis of such rigor and relevance, and for defending it today with remarkable clarity and excellence. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the members of the examination committee for their generous commitment in evaluating this doctoral work, and particularly Dr. Nasri, Dr. Jesse, Dr. Helen Cole, and Dr. Daniel Cuartas, and also Dr. Melanie Lowe for her work to this committee. Your willingness to carefully review this thesis, to prepare insightful questions and accommodate your demanding schedules to participate in this defense is deeply appreciated. I would also like to extend my congratulations to Eliana and Ciro, the two thesis supervisors, for their sustained guidance of this excellent work over many years, 8 years, I think, as well as to so many collaborators and co-authors who have made valuable contributions. As coordinator of this doctoral program in medical research and public health at our university, I would also like to to express our great satisfaction for having hosted this doctoral project. It is without doubt a pioneering piece of work that will serve as a valuable reference for future research, both within this field and beyond. Its impact will, without doubt, be strengthened by the fact that the three main articles that form part of this project have been published in prestigious international publications. Beyond the formal assessment of the thesis, whose responsibility belongs to the committee, I would like to offer some additional perspective on the candidate's professional trajectory. I have some doubts in doing that in Spanish or English, but I think translation for Nasrin, I don't know if it doesn't work.
Not easily, but we can translate if you would like to.
Maybe some too. I'll do it in English out of personal comments. I have had the privilege of knowing Luis Gabriel for over 30 years. Our collaboration began when I was working to expand the Cochrane collaboration in Latin America, where he played a truly instrumental role in establishing the Cochrane collaboration in Colombia. We later collaborated during his time at the BMJ, contributing to make possible the Spanish translation of the book Clinical Evidence. Subsequently, after he joined PAHO, we revised and published a new edition of the translation of the book Testing Treatment, building on the original version that he himself had helped to promote and edit. During his tenure at PAHO, he was consistently a valuable ally in strengthening the Ibero-American Cochrane network across several Latin American countries, facilitating access to the Cochrane Library in some of them and supporting participation in the Cochrane collaboration held in Madrid in 2011. Unfortunately, the collaboration between PAHO and Cochrane did not reach its full potential, largely due to the recurring political changes that PAHO has experienced over the years. For all these reasons, it's both a personal and academic satisfaction for me to see that Luis Gabriel formally concludes his professional career with this significant contribution, which will stand as a lasting legacy. At the same time, I'm confident that this milestone does not represent an end, but rather it's a challenge for continuing an active and productive engagement in generating knowledge that contributes to improve people's health. Many thanks to you all.
Yes. Here, I'm very moved by the words that Dr. Bonfil. And from all of you, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions in the room? We don't have any questions, it seems, Nasrin, from our end.
Okay, well then at this point, then I'm going to thank everybody and bring us to the end of the public aspect of this defense. Sorry?
Yeah, just closing, I forgot to say something I really want to say now. It's going to be very short,
ahead.
but I want to acknowledge Maria Fernanda and my brother Daniel, who were all the time there helping me get through. And I really wanted to express my special gratitude as well as the people that were supporting me throughout the process. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis Gabriel. We can't forget all the people that have been on our journey, especially those closest to us that go through the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows and see us through it all. So I'm sure that was greatly appreciated. If I could ask yourself, Luis Gabriel, colleagues, to provide the committee with a little bit of time and space for our deliberations for the outcome of the defense. We will be joining another link for the deliberations, but I believe remaining in the room. Once we have completed our deliberations, we will invite Dr. Luis Gabriel to join us so we can share the outcome with him, and then we'll invite you all back in to this room to hear the final outcome of the deliberations, and I think Dr. Cole will help with the arrangements for that. In the meantime, I think we'll see you in about 15 to 20 minutes, and over to Helen to kind of confirm the logistics for this part. Thank you.
I think that you can go ahead and start asking. Everyone is back in the room. You can't see them, but a lot of them have their cameras up and everything, so they're ready.
They're ready.
Can you hear us all
Well,
right?
if that's the case, can everybody hear me? Okay, so on behalf of the committee, it is my great pleasure to announce that following private deliberation, the examining committee has unanimously agreed that Dr. Luis Gabriel Cuervo AMORE has successfully and impressively defended his doctoral thesis. The committee was particularly struck by the rigor of the research, the clarity of the argument, and the candidate's thoughtful and confident engagement with questions throughout today's defense. The work represents a valuable and original contribution to the field. There were 4 potential scores we could have given: not pass, pass, notable, and excellent. And the committee has conferred the score of excellent. Congratulations, Luis Gabriel. On behalf of the committee, I would like to congratulate you on reaching this important milestone in your doctoral journey, Luis Gabriel. And I would like to acknowledge that today's defense was conducted in multilingual and hybrid format. So on behalf of the Tribunal Committee, I thank the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, the examining committee, supervisors, Xavier as the tutor, the technical support team, and all the attendees, both in person and online, for their participation. And this formally concludes the defense. We can now proceed to the celebrations, and I hope they continue for days and days and days. Congratulations.
Felicitaciones. Un abrazo grande.
Felicidades, Luis Gabriel, muy merecido. Gracias, Daniel. Gracias, Narim.
Sometimes there's a tradition of taking a picture together with the people.
Here?
Yeah.
Just turn on your cameras.
la pantalla o la voz tuyo.
Adrián,